All right, so have you ever been having like a totally normal conversation and it just goes completely off the rails? Like
Yeah.
you're speaking the same language, but your brains are on totally different planets.
Like two ships passing in the night.
Yeah, exactly. And it always kind of gets me thinking,
Yeah.
is there some like hidden logic to these
Oh, okay.
communication clashes?
Right.
Well, buckle up, Buttercup, because in this deep dive,
Okay.
we're about to decode the matrix of cognitive functions
I like it.
and how they totally make or break our relationships.
That's good, yeah.
So our guides on this journey are Carlos and Casey,
Mm-hmm.
who had this like super fascinating conversation about MBTI
Yes.
and more specifically
Mm-hmm.
the function stack model.
Which I love. I love the function stack.
Okay, so
Tell me more.
lay it on me. What is the function stack? I feel like people hear MBTI and they're like, oh, yeah, I'm an introvert, I'm an extrovert.
Right, you just get a letter. Like you're taking a Scantron.
Yes.
And they're just going to put you in a box.
Yes.
But the function stack really gets to like the nuances
Okay.
of how you think
Yeah.
and what your priorities are
Okay.
and what tools you use to navigate the world.
So instead of just being like, are you an introvert or an extrovert? It's like,
Right.
okay, we're all thinking, we're all feeling, we're all sensing, we're all intuiting.
Exactly.
But in what order?
Yes, it's the hierarchy of it.
Right.
It shows which ones you rely on the most naturally.
Yes.
And Carlos, actually, one of the people we'll be hearing from,
Okay.
he's doing some really fascinating work with AI. So he's using this to simulate different thinking styles in machines.
Wait, so he's programming AI
Yeah.
to have like personalities.
Pretty much. He's programming in these different functions
Wow.
to see how they play out. And it's actually really illuminating because you can start to see how even a machine
Okay.
with a certain function stack might have certain biases. Like if you program one to be very logic-driven,
Oh my gosh.
it might have trouble with emotional intelligence or even make decisions that seem to us illogical.
That's wild. So like our brains aren't computers, but there's still some serious programming going on.
Exactly. We have these default settings based on our function stack
Right.
that really shape how we approach pretty much everything.
Okay, so this is where it gets juicy.
Okay, I'm right.
This is where it's like, okay, I see how this is playing out in my daily life. Okay.
Carlos believes that these function stacks
Mm-hmm.
are the key to understanding why we click with some people
Right.
and clash with others.
Right, yeah.
Like it's all about the alignment or misalignment.
Totally. It's like if your go-to function is logic
Mm-hmm.
and your partner is all about feeling, you're going to have some communication breakdowns.
For sure.
Like guaranteed.
100%. And he actually uses the funniest example.
Oh, tell me.
He's like, my opposite MBTI, like
Mm-mm.
polar opposite, ESTP,
Oh, wow.
they would probably call me stupid and insane
Oh,
almost immediately.
that's great.
That's how different their brains are.
I love it.
So I'm thinking, imagine you're trying to have a calm, rational discussion about your feelings.
With someone who's like all about spontaneity and action.
Yeah.
It's like trying to mix oil and water. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah. You're speaking different languages.
Okay, so for everyone listening,
Mm-hmm.
think about it.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever had those opposite clashes?
Oh, I'm sure. I mean, everyone has, right?
Yes. Like that friend or partner
Mm-hmm.
that is just speaking a totally different language when it comes to making a decision or
Okay.
expressing emotions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like that's when these functions are
Oh,
like,
yeah.
aha, now I see it.
It's like having a new lens to see these dynamics.
Right. And instead of getting mad at the other person, it's like,
Exactly.
oh, this is just how they operate.
That's how they're wired.
This is how they're wired. It's not personal.
Right.
It's just different.
It's fascinating, though, right?
Oh, it's so fascinating.
Because it shows just how much variety there is in the way people think.
Right.
And that's kind of beautiful.
Okay. But on the flip side,
Okay.
because it's not all clashes,
No, not at all.
they talk about how certain function stack combinations
Right.
can lead to really strong connections.
Yes.
Like unbreakable bonds.
Absolutely. And I think it makes sense because when you think about how these functions interact,
Right.
there are some combinations where the strengths of one
Mm-hmm.
really complement the weaknesses of the other.
Oh.
And they highlight this really interesting dynamic between ENFJs and INFJs.
Okay.
And what's cool about these two types is that their function stacks are almost mirrors of each other.
Oh, wow.
They have the same functions, but the order is flipped. And Carlos was speculating that maybe this inversion actually creates a natural balance
Oh, that's interesting.
where, one is strong where the other is weak
Mhm.
and vice versa. So they instinctively understand each other.
Oh.
Like they have this shorthand.
Okay, so It's not just a theory, though.
Right.
Because Casey actually mentions that her best friend, Nick, is an ENFJ.
Oh, how interesting.
And they have this crazy strong bond.
Wow. So it seems to line up.
Yeah, and she even jokes that she thinks he's going to become an INFJ eventually.
I'd be curious to see if that happens because it really makes you wonder, can your function stack actually change over time?
Right.
Or is it more that you become more aware of it?
So I'm curious, for our listeners, are there any relationships in your life where you're seeing these dynamics play out?
Yeah, like do you have a best friend where it's
Yes.
like, oh, that makes so much sense now.
They must be this, or I must be this.
Right, exactly.
Right.
Because when you start looking at it through this lens, it clicks.
It's amazing how much we can learn about ourselves and the people around us.
For sure.
When we start to understand these underlying patterns.
Absolutely.
All right. Now, before we spiral down the rabbit hole of relationships,
Okay.
let's shift gears a little bit to a concept that both Carlos and Casey find super intriguing.
Yes.
The shadow self. Ooh, the shadow self. Now, that's one of those things where it's like...
It's kind of spooky.
It feels kind of spooky, but also like, I kind of get it.
It's familiar.
Yeah. So like, what is that?
So the shadow self, it's like those parts of ourselves that we've just kind of shoved down into the basement.
Oh, like hidden away?
Yeah, we don't want to look at them. We don't want to deal with them.
But it's those boxes you're too scared to open?
Exactly. And we all have them.
Okay, so it's not just like an MBTI thing?
No, this is universal.
Okay, so this applies to everyone.
Everyone's got a shadow.
Okay, so like what kind of stuff is in those boxes?
It's those aspects of ourselves that, for whatever reason, we've decided are not okay.
Like bad traits.
Could be, but it's not always that simple.
Really?
It's more like anything we've disowned about ourselves.
Okay, so like if I was really good at something, but told myself it was stupid.
Exactly. Or maybe you were told as a kid, don't be so sensitive, or stop being so loud.
Right.
And you just shut those parts of yourself down.
Wow. Okay, so if everyone's walking around with this hidden shadow self, how do we even know it's there?
Well, it usually shows up in our behavior.
Oh, interesting.
Especially in our relationships.
Like those clashes we were talking about before.
Exactly. Those can be a big clue.
Okay, so like instead of blaming the other person, maybe it's our shadow acting up.
Exactly. It's like, why am I so bothered by this?
Oh, right. It's got to be more than them just being annoying.
Right. One classic example is projection.
Okay, what's that?
Have you ever, like, gotten incredibly annoyed by someone who's always late?
Oh my gosh, yes. Drives me crazy.
Right. But what if, deep down, you actually envy their ability to be more relaxed about time?
Oh. Wait a minute. So it's not really about them being late at all. It's about something in me that their lateness triggers.
Bingo.
Oh my gosh, that's wild.
Right. It's like we project these disowned parts of ourselves onto others.
So we don't have to face them ourselves.
Exactly. It's easier to get mad at someone else than to look in the mirror.
Okay, that makes sense, but how do we actually, like, stop doing that?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right, because it's one thing to know we have a shadow.
Right.
But how do we actually work with it?
Well, it all starts with awareness.
That's the thing, right? Like, easier said than done.
For sure. But like anything worthwhile, it takes time and effort. You got to start somewhere, though, right?
Okay, so where do we even begin?
Well, I think the most important thing is awareness. Like we were saying before, it's about noticing those times when you have a strong reaction to something.
So like when that person shows up late and I feel my blood pressure rising.
Exactly. Instead of just reacting, take a moment to pause. Ask yourself, why am I so triggered right now? What's really going on here?
Okay, so instead of blaming them, I should be asking myself if it's my own shadow.
Yeah, it's like becoming a detective in your own life.
I like it. So we're looking for clues about our shadow.
Exactly. And this is where it can get a little uncomfortable. Because shadow work, it takes honesty. Brutal honesty sometimes.
Ooh, okay. So, like what? Spill the tea.
It's about acknowledging the parts of ourselves that we've tried so hard to hide.
Yeah.
Even from ourselves.
Like opening those boxes in the attic we were talking about.
Exactly. And you know what we often find when we open those boxes?
What?
It's not as scary as we thought it would be. Yeah, a lot of times those shadow aspects, they're not actually bad.
Interesting.
They're just parts of ourselves that we've disowned. Maybe we were told they weren't okay or that people wouldn't like us if we showed them.
So it's not about getting rid of our shadow, but more like making friends with it.
Exactly. The shadow is a part of us. It's not going anywhere.
So we might as well embrace it.
Right. And you know what? When we can accept those parts of ourselves that we've been hiding, that's when we can really start to feel whole.
It's like all the pieces finally fit together.
Right. And that's the beauty of this work, you know? By facing our shadows, we actually become more authentically ourselves.
This has been so eye-opening. I feel like we could talk about this for hours.
Me too. There's so much more to explore with this stuff.
Right. Like, we've just scratched the surface of how understanding our cognitive functions and our shadow selves can help us grow as individuals and in our relationships.
Absolutely. It's a lifelong journey.
So for our listeners, if you're feeling inspired to dive deeper into all of this, we'll be sure to link some amazing resources in the show notes for you.
Definitely check those out.
But for now, just take a moment today to notice your own patterns. Pay attention to what triggers those strong reactions in you. You might be surprised by what you discover about yourself. It's all about taking those small steps towards greater self-awareness. And who knows, it might just lead to more fulfilling relationships along the way. That's all for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.